Over the years, the Volvo name has become synonymous with strength and reliability. Volvo's commitment to standards and obsession for safety have always been far ahead of its time. For this reason, the Volvo car has endured over a half-century of criticism. But through the years, has developed a style all its own. At the dawn of the 20th century, the sight of a motor car rumbling through the Swedish countryside was certain to draw attention. Although it was first introduced to Sweden in 1891, it would take many years for the motor car to become an integral part of Swedish life, and even longer before it would be driven by the common man. Wealthy Swedish businessmen and landowners were the first to discover the virtues of the private motor car. But with the Swedish car-making industry virtually non-existent, these early drivers were usually seen behind the wheel of a French, German, or American model. Two men were determined to change this. The first was S.R. Gabrielsson, a businessman who dreamed of one day selling a Swedish motor car. The other was Gustav Larsson, an engineer who gained experience building cars for the Morris Company in England. By the early 1920s, both men were working for the ball bearing company SKF. Here they had become acquaintances, but had never spoken at length. Then on July 25, 1924, S.R. Gabrielsson was eating crawfish at a cafe in Stockholm when Larsson happened to walk in. Gabrielsson recognized his co-worker and invited him to the table. After the meal, the two men discussed their mutual interest in developing a Swedish motor car industry. Although the two men had very different backgrounds, they shared a similar philosophy. Since the turn of the century, Western car makers built their cars from pre-existing parts. The parent company ordered the parts from vast supply catalogs, maintaining little control over quality. Larsson and Gabrielsson sought to change this. Insisted that the parts should be designed by their company, with the suppliers of these parts being subjected to routine inspection. The direction of the company was established, but money was needed to get it running. S.R. Gabrielsson knew that it would be easier to attract investment if he had a prototype. One day, Gabrielsson was looking through a local magazine when he came upon a picture of a French Voisin with a rebuilt body. The work had been done by a well-known Swedish landscape painter, Helmer Musola. Gabrielsson asked the painter to design a body for his prototype. Musola agreed, and by June of 1926, the first car was completed. Both Larsson and Gabrielsson were still working for SKF. They devoted all their spare time to the project, and most of the funding came from Gabrielsson's sales commission. Because there was still no company, there was no badge to put on the car. For lack of a better idea, Helmer Musola simply attached the Swedish symbol for iron, a symbol which is widely associated with masculinity. The first prototype was an open version with a rugged, if not conservative, appearance. It was given the name Jacob. Jacob's Day is the Swedish calendar name for July 25th, the day that Gabrielsson and Larsson met in the cafe. 9 more prototypes were built. After proving it could be done, Gabrielsson received the blessing of SKF's board of directors. Instead of starting a new car company, SKF decided to reinstate one of its dormant ball bearing subsidiaries. The ball bearing company AB Volvo was dusted off. And on January the 1st, S.R. Gabrielsson was made managing director. Production of the Volvo motor cars would take place at the site of the old Nordic Ball Bearing Company outside of Gothenburg. In October of 1926, Gabrielsen and Larsen both drove prototypes to their new home at Gothenburg. Upon arrival, they were surprised to find the gatekeeper, Mr. Lundström, and his loyal dog already in residence. Conversion from ball bearing production to car assembly was rapid. Volvo announced that the first car would roll off the assembly line on April 27, 1927. The night before, Volvo machinists worked at a frantic pace to ensure that the car would roll out on schedule. This hurried assembly took its toll. The differential was put on backwards. In the morning, the car drove off the assembly platform backwards. The problem was discovered and an unceremonious debut was narrowly averted. This first production Volvo was called the OV4. The O referred to the open top, and the 4 designated 4 cylinders. There was nothing revolutionary about the OV4. It had a conventional design with a definite American influence. It was not elegant, nor was it fast. However, it was sturdy, and most importantly, it was Swedish. The first Volvo was delivered personally by S.R. Gabrielsen to a Stockholm dealership. The second car was produced within a week. From then on, Volvo's 60 workers averaged about 5 cars per week. The OV4 was warmly received by Stockholm car dealers. However, the bitter Swedish climate prompted the demand for a closed version of the car. The closed version was designated PV4. The P stood for private. When it was unveiled in the summer of 1927, the PV4 was criticized for being ugly and old-fashioned. The bonnet was short and stubby. The roof was humped, and the padded leather exterior made it appear fat. Helmer Masola was so disgusted by the car that he refused to have his name associated with it. Later that summer, Volvo rolled out an improved version of the saloon. The bonnet was lengthened, the cowling shortened, and the padded exterior was made less bulky. However, it was too little, too late. Sales dropped rapidly, and Volvo was spending increasing amounts of money on the high standards they demanded of their suppliers. Volvo refused to compromise these standards, and the company sank deeper into debt. SKF was beginning to lose confidence in Volvo when the American Nash Corporation expressed an interest in buying it. Nash was so interested, in fact, that Charles Nash sailed to Sweden to close the deal. On the eve of his arrival, S.R. Gabrielsen pleaded with the president of SKF not to sell Volvo. He made a desperate promise that the company would turn a profit in less than a year. He was right. In late 1929, Volvo finally turned a profit. Ironically, this change of fortune had nothing to do with motor cars. Trucks were Volvo's salvation. By 1929, Volvo had already become known for its rugged construction. While this reputation did not help car sales, it was perfect for truck buyers. The Swedish post office ordered 70. Small businesses found the little trucks suitable for delivering milk or bread. While Volvo concentrated on the production of trucks, a few of the OV4s were secretly modified with 6-cylinder engines, then entered into the 1928 Swedish Winter Rally. The 6-cylinder car scored the fastest time. This achievement sparked an interest in a production model. But some questioned the timing of introducing a larger engine when car sales were already in a slump. Advocates noted that the larger car could be sold to a new market, taxi drivers. Almost 2 years to the day after the first car left the factory, a six-cylinder Volvo emerged on Stockholm's cobblestone streets. There were initially two lines of the larger Volvos, the private five-seat model and the seven-seat taxi. Many private owners found that the six-cylinder Volvos could be stylized to suit their taste. Often the owners would give their cars a nickname. This redesigned Volvo was given the nickname the fishing hook. Apparently, the owner found it very helpful when fishing for girls. Just as Volvo's future was beginning to brighten, the American stock market plunged over $50 billion in one day. The Wall Street crash trumpeted in an era of economic hardship. The Great Depression spread like a malignancy, infecting Europe, and dragging many Western businesses to the verge of extinction. As the Great Depression spread into Europe, the car market began to disappear. Manufacturers competed aggressively for the few remaining car buyers. In Sweden, this competition turned ugly. General Motors fired the first salvo, accusing Volvo of not being Swedish. Volvo took the offensive, pointing out that Chevrolets were simply assembled in Sweden. One Volvo official was quoted as saying, "When a salesman for another make of car comes to your door, don't be surprised if the only Swedish parts are the water in your radiator and the air in your tires." Although Volvo was beginning to irritate American dealers, it was still a small operation. As a result, each car received a great deal of attention. Every chassis was driven around a hilly 12-kilometer test track and then inspected. Once the body was attached, the car was again taken on the circuit, then inspected and given final adjustments. Such attention to detail reinforced Volvo's reputation for being rugged and durable. But Volvo also began to establish a less flattering reputation. Their cars were criticized for lacking style. Workhorses suitable for the police or post office, but not a bachelor. Volvo wanted to shed this reputation. They looked across the Atlantic for help.
Today is a big day at the Chicago Century of Progress Exposition. For today, amid these wonders of the world, a motor car is going to make its heroic bid for the championship of motoring safety, the Airflow Chrysler.
In 1934, Chrysler introduced a revolutionary new design called the Airflow. The Chrysler Airflow featured an aerodynamic shape, safety features that were ahead of its time. Conscious of safety and hungry for style, Volvo designers expressed a strong interest in the Airflow. Chrysler was eager to showcase its new car. High-profile displays like the 1933 World's Fair provided ample opportunity for Volvo to admire the new design.
You must have a lot of confidence in those brakes.
Mm-hmm. Chrysler hydraulic brakes.
This is a picture of the 1933 Chrysler prototype. This is the 1935 Volvo Carioca. The fact that several Volvo employees had previously worked for Chrysler suggests that the similarities are probably not a coincidence. In any case, the Carioca marked a radical departure for Volvo. However, like its American cousin, the optimistic design contrasted with the realities of economic depression. Only 500 were produced. The motor car was still rare in Sweden. Only 1 out of every 40 people drove a car, compared with 1 in 5 in America. In rural Sweden, the horse dominated the roadways. By the mid-30s, the Depression showed little sign of loosening its grip on the world economy. Many people wondered if it was ever going to end. In response to the austere environment of the 30s, Volvo decided to build a small car that could be afforded by the masses, a true people's car. The result was the PV51, Volvo's first mass-produced small car. The first PV51 emerged from Volvo's factory in December 1936. The overall shape of the car was similar to the Carioca, but the lines had been changed to appear less radical. The PV51 came with simple upholstery and no armrests. Critics accused it of being too Spartan, and the following year an improved version was introduced. Now that Volvo had widened its market, the company wanted to soften its image. New advertisements featured attractive Swedish models juxtaposed against Volvo's circle and arrow. A badge that had come to represent ruggedness and masculinity. In 1938, Volvo sold over 2,000 cars. As the company grew, its founders sought to maintain Volvo's congenial working environment. Employee activities were encouraged. Even a Volvo soccer team was formed. While Volvo founders encouraged organized sports, they discouraged organized labor. So when a powerful Swedish trade union attempted to organize Volvo workers, SR Gabrielsson took a unique step. He kept the trade union at bay by recognizing an internal organization, the Volvo Staff Union. Gabrielsson and Larsson both became members. However, the two men were always respected, even by a caricature artist who was commissioned to draw the Volvo executives. By 1939, Volvo's car production reached a new high, but the company was still producing more trucks than cars. And in the turbulent years to come, Volvo trucks would undertake a completely new role. Hitler's lightning invasion of Poland surprised the Swedish people. However, the occupation of Denmark and Norway was a cause for alarm. Sweden was neutral, but then so had been Belgium. Hitler was sitting on the doorstep, and his next move could not be predicted. The Swedish civil defense was sent to guard the borders. The Swedish defense needed all-terrain trucks to move supplies and artillery. For Volvo, the conversion from truck chassis to military vehicles was rapid. The advanced suspension of this truck was demonstrated when it hauled an artillery piece up the steps of the Gothenburg Museum of Art. As the war in Europe raged on, Scandinavia was completely cut off from oil supplies. However, the region did have an energy source of its own: natural gas. Volvo engineers were commissioned to build a natural gas combustion engine with a modest output of 50 horsepower. Although these engines were intended for Swedish defense forces, many private owners had them installed in their PV50 series Volvos. The fuel was simply carried on a trailer behind the car. As the Allied armies pushed into France, the threat to Sweden's borders disappeared. Life in Stockholm returned to normal. For 3 years, Volvo had concentrated almost entirely on truck production. Their most recent car, the PV60, was a pre-war design. Volvo embarked on the construction of a small car with a more contemporary look. A number of scale models were built and the style was improved several times. When the engineers settled on a design, the model was taken outside to be viewed by Larsson and Gabrielsson. The two men walked around the car, nodded, and approved the design. The most important decision in Volvo's history was made in under 20 minutes. In September of 1944, Volvo held an exhibition at the Royal Lawn Tennis Hall in Stockholm. The centerpiece of the show was Volvo's newest car, the PV444. Gabrielsen and Larsen were confident that this new car would be a vital part of Volvo's future, and they wanted all of the employees to be present at the unveiling. 2 trains were specially arranged to bring the workers and their families from Gothenburg to Stockholm. During the exhibition, over 2,000 cars were sold at a cost of 4,800 kroner, a quarter of the average annual wage. The new Volvo marked the introduction of the laminated windscreen, padded dashboards, and the sun visor. Perhaps the most enduring symbol of Volvo's commitment to safety was the introduction of a safety cage. The safety cage was a sturdy framework that surrounded the passengers and protected them if the car began to roll. The P-444 promised to be the family car for Sweden. It was safe, attractive, and at only 1/4 the average annual Swedish income, it was well within the range of Sweden's growing middle class. Everything seemed perfect. However, there was one problem. To produce the new car, Volvo needed vast quantities of sheet steel. Europe had always been Volvo's source of steel. However, most of the Central European steel plants had either been destroyed by Allied bombers or were now behind the Iron Curtain. With Europe out of the question, Volvo turned to America for help. But American auto companies were retooling from war production back to car production. Ford, GM, Studebaker, Chrysler, Hudson, and American Motors all needed steel. The small Swedish company with a funny name was not a privileged customer. Priority was given to the American car makers. Volvo would simply have to wait. Without steel, production virtually stopped. Volvo had projected the assembly of 10,000 cars and trucks during 1946. Instead, they produced only 900 trucks. Volvo did not receive any steel until 1948. In 1949, nearly 5 years after the Volvo prototype was displayed at the Stockholm exhibition, the first PV444 rolled off the assembly line. Volvo could finally honor the 2,000 sales contracts it signed at the Stockholm exhibition. For the delight of the customers, these cars were sold at their 1944 price.
Volvon är gjord för att passa just er. Det känner ni så snart ni satt er bakom ratten.
Ja, här finns allt ni kan önska er av en riktig bil.
Elegans,
Säkerhet.
ekonomi.
It may have taken 5 years for the 444 to roll out of the factory, but it did not take long for it to leave car dealerships in Stockholm. Demand for new cars was so high in Sweden that of the 12,000 projected to be built, 10,000 were sold even before production began. Some customers waited 2 years to take delivery.
Ni glömmer att det finns något som heter stora avstånd och dåliga vägar när ni kör PV444.
En ny värld full av nya
The PV444 was extremely popular among Swedish drivers. It carried the Volvo reputation for durability, yet it was roomy and comfortable enough to take a nap.
Volvos värde varar väl.
In the early 50s, Volvo proved that it could feed a hungry Scandinavian market, but its leaders dreamed of selling to America. Volvo's American consultants advised that if an exotic Scandinavian car could make it anywhere in America, it would be California. Thus, in the autumn of 1955, a white 444 appeared at the California Motor Show. The first challenge faced by importers was to familiarize the American people with the name Volvo. Promoters targeted high-profile events, and the small Swedish company soon became the unlikely sponsor of the Las Vegas Tournament of Champions. In 1958, a standard 444 broke the Canadian coast-to-coast record, traveling from Vancouver to Halifax in under 86 hours. That same year, Volvo won endurance races in Connecticut and Colorado. But California was where Volvo gained the strongest foothold. A reputation for quality, coupled with some glamorous sponsorships, helped to make Volvo a household name. But what ultimately broke Volvo into the American market was the publication of a study which showed that Volvos depreciated a mere 8% in the first year, as compared with 40% for an American car. Once heralded as a family car, Volvos were now driven by eligible bachelors who were interested both in women and resale value. The virtues of the Swedish import were even put to music when the medallion sang the praises of the '59 Volvo. The Volvo 444 quickly spread eastward from California. Soon, the white Swedish cars were seen driving through Boston and New York. Volvo had broken the vast American market, and improved versions were quick to follow. The all-purpose 445 was made by enlarging the existing chassis. This became a popular staff car for the United Nations. The roomy 544 was popular with boxing legend Ingemar Johansson. In 1959, he left Yankee Stadium in one after using the hammer of Thor to knock out Floyd Patterson for the heavyweight title. Emboldened by the success of the 444, Volvo decided to take an ambitious step. They would build a sports car. Fiberglass bodies were purchased from America. Most of the other parts, including the engine, were borrowed directly from the export version of the 444. The Volvo P1900 made its public debut in 1955. In spite of its looks, the three-speed, four-cylinder sports car did not incite enthusiasm among drivers. Demand was low, and only 67 were produced. Volvo's management decided that a new sedan was needed to replace the venerable 444. They called upon a young Gothenburg art student named YouuPŭļc to sculpt the design. Volvo's design team built a series of successful prototypes. Pŭļc was given the task of building a full-scale model that incorporated the most desirable features of each. His design was approved, and the Volvo Amazon went into production. When the Amazon rolled into Stockholm in 1957, it introduced a completely new look for Volvo. Catalogs hailed the new sedan as a fast and fiery Swedish beauty. Despite the emphasis on appearance, the Amazon was built to be strong. Considerable attention was paid to passenger safety. The Amazon came with several new safety features, including Volvo's patented three-point safety belt. Volvo engineers decided that if such a feature could protect an egg, it could certainly protect a person. Volvo safety researchers paid attention to every detail, right down to the sunglasses. The three-point safety belt was the brainchild of Volvo engineer Nils Bohlin. Bohlin had just signed on as the head of safety engineering when one of Volvo's sales representatives was involved in a fatal car accident. During the crash, the Volvo employee slid out of his seatbelt and was thrown from the car. Bohlin decided to use one additional strap to anchor the passenger into the seat. This simple idea worked effectively on test dummies. Now the researchers wanted to see how it would work on a person. The human guinea pig was dressed in a vinyl suit to maximize the slipping effect on impact. A helmet was put on just as a safety precaution. The test sled rammed the wall with a G-force of 15, and the intrepid volunteer remained firmly anchored to the seat. The additional strap divided the pressure along a greater distance, thereby reducing the risk of injury along the belt. The three-point belt was a simple and effective solution. Even with a slippery vinyl suit, the volunteer experienced little movement other than the uncomfortable jolt of impact. Many critics charged that Volvo's obsession with safety verged on the fanatical. In the late 50s, safety was not a great concern. Added features such as seat belts were considered eyesores that detracted from the natural beauty of the car. People didn't wish to be reminded of the dangers of driving. So in 1959, when Volvo became the first automaker to introduce front seat belts as a standard feature, public reaction was cool. Volvo turned a deaf ear to the critics. Instead, they persevered with additional safety experiments, like this test, which was carried out to analyze the difference between the slip joint and non-slip joint harness. In the tradition of Volvo cars, the Amazon's frame was built to endure punishment. This car had just withstood a 30-mile-an-hour impact. Yet the rear doors could be opened and closed with no sign of damage. The all-important safety cage had protected the passenger compartment. Even the front seat could still be adjusted normally. But the most important inspection focused on the dummies. Volvo worked closely with medical experts in determining the effects of the crash on different parts of the body. Volvo's obsession with safety was reflected in its stated view toward road rallies. ÉgyPrédicson had once said that road rallies were as important to the industry as dog racing. But when Gabrielson retired, he turned the company over to the younger Gunnar Engellau. Engellau saw advantages in the publicity that came from racing, and in 1958, Volvo became active in the European and South American rally circuit. Volvo's most successful rally driver was Gunnar Andersson, known affectionately as Volvo Gunnar. Andersson became the European champion in 1958. Another change introduced by Volvo's new leadership was the revival of the sports car. Several prototypes were produced, including 3 which were designed and built in Italy. Volvo production was already at an all-time high, and its factories didn't have the capacity to build the sleek new car. It scoured Europe looking for a plant, and finally settled on a contract with a pressed steel company in Britain. Britain would also be the site of Volvo's most unexpected publicity boost. A British production company was preparing to launch a new television series called The Saint. The dashing hero, played by Roger Moore, would need a sports car. The producers were interested in the new Jaguar E-Type, but Jaguar couldn't provide a car in time to meet the production deadline. Roger Moore saw a picture of the new Volvo 1800. His producer called the Volvo agent in London, and a deal was made. It appears that the agent did not understand the significance of the phone call, and the producers paid full price for their first car. For the entire run of the series, the Saint pursued villains in his sleek white Volvo. Roger Moore was so fond of the car that he continued to drive it privately well after the series was finished. The Saint had shown that the sporty new Volvo was worthy of television, but Crown Prince Carl Gustaf proved that it was elegant enough for royalty. The Volvo 1800 was more stylish than it was fast. Its top speed in the quarter mile was around 18 seconds from a standing start. For this reason, most sports car enthusiasts turned up their noses. In Sweden, the car became known as the old man's racer. Whether or not the 1800 was a true sports car was a matter for debate, but few could argue that it was an exceptional two-person touring car. The sleek new Volvo was warmly received by American car buyers. By 1966, over 25,000 cars had been produced, and half of them had come to America. At the same time, Volvo's Amazon was reaching the end of its production run. Motoring journals speculated as to when the new Volvo sedan would emerge. To confuse eager journalists, the new Volvo was tested in disguise. The Volvo 140 series was introduced in 1966. By representing a return to its roots, this car promised to carry Volvo into a new era. In the mid-1960s, the prevailing view toward automotive safety was beginning to change. Roads were becoming crowded, and the number of traffic fatalities increased every year. The United States became the first country in the world to introduce preventive safety measures. Car makers were forced to comply, but Volvo already had. When it was introduced, the Volvo 144 was touted as the safest car in the world. It introduced an energy-absorbing front and rear section, or crumple zones. Its all-welded body achieved unequal strength by incorporating box section beams and steel reinforcements. Eager to showcase the robust construction of their new sedan, Volvo decided to stack 7 cars on top of each other. This publicity stunt resulted in Volvo's famous hardtop advertisement. In the end, it was high winds, not structural failure, which brought the pile crashing down. Volvo's 140 series was not glamorous, but its strength and simplicity were welcomed by a public increasingly concerned with safety over style. Volvo's obsession with safety did not end with the 140 series. In 1972, they built the Volvo Experimental Safety Car, or VESC. The VESC was used to research new safety ideas. It featured a head restraint that popped up on impact and airbags that protected backseat passengers. Large shock absorbers were incorporated into the bumper. This feature protected the body in a collision of up to 10 miles per hour. Even the steering column was rigged for safety. During impact, the wheel would simply collapse into the dashboard. In northern Sweden, snow and ice are a part of life. But when spring arrives, the Swedish motorist is faced with a different hazard: mud. During the thaw, mud covers roadways and cars. When the headlights become caked in mud, the unfortunate motorist was forced to undertake the dirty job of cleaning it off. To address this problem, the VESK introduced headlight wipers. In 1974, this feature was required for all cars in Sweden. The VESK also introduced a warning light on the door and a new semi-passive safety belt. Volvo's experimental safety car was never meant to go into production. Some of its safety features would be incorporated into later models, while others would be forgotten. But when the 240 and 260 series cars were introduced in late 1974, it was clear that the new line owed much of their appearance to the VESK. The Volvo 240 featured a 2.1-liter engine, while the 260 series marked Volvo's return to the 6-cylinder engine. The series also featured a radically new way of assembling cars. The traditional assembly line was replaced by a series of workstations, at which small groups carried out a wide variety of tasks. In 1975, the 240 was voted Car of the Year by Car and Driver magazine. But Volvo had little time to celebrate. In America, Volvo's market was jeopardized by the wave of Japanese cars that were flooding into the country. At the same time, the international fuel crisis sparked rampant inflation, reducing the demand for cars. But Volvo's most serious problem was domestic. A national pay policy was implemented in Sweden. In 1975 alone, Volvo's labor costs surged an astonishing 22%. For such a labor-intensive company, this increase was devastating. In 1977, Volvo honored its 50th anniversary, but company executives had found little reason to celebrate. Car sales had plunged by almost 75,000 in 1 year. Vast stockpiles of new Volvos sat quietly outside the factories, and production was curtailed. For years, it had been rumored that Volvo would merge with fellow Swedish car maker Saab. In May 1977, Volvo and Saab confirmed this rumor. However, in only 3 months, talks broke down and the agreement was terminated. Volvo decided to move forward on its own. Now the decision rested on whether simply to continue the 200 series car or introduce a completely new line. With the company's future at stake, Volvo took the bold step of building a new sedan. The 700 series was born. The 740 and 760 cars gave Volvo a new look. They boasted unique lines and elegant interiors. But their most important feature was, of course, safety. If a Volvo owner in Sweden was involved in an accident, a Volvo inspection team would arrive on the scene to survey the damage. Volvo representatives worked with police, insurance companies, and medical experts. All of the information would be entered into a database and used for further safety research. The new Volvos offered the customer a choice of both 4 and 6 cylinders. For those who wanted speed, all models were available with a turbo. But in the end, it was haunting images like this that brought customers back to Volvo. The realization that each of these dummies represents a human being provides a terrifying reminder of how dangerous driving can be. The most safety-conscious car buyers are parents with young children. Therefore, it's not surprising the most popular 700 series model was not the sporty turbo sedan, it was the wagon. By 1986, 40% of all Volvos produced were wagons. For years, motoring journals speculated as to when Volvo would release a front-wheel drive car. After all, the company is based in Scandinavia, where long, treacherous winters can be a way of life. Speculation ended with the introduction of the Volvo 850 series. The 850 sedan was introduced in 1991. Armed with front-wheel drive, the sleek new Volvo could negotiate a wintry road, and with its turbocharged engine, it could do it quickly. But Volvo never forgot its roots. With the introduction of the side impact airbags, the 850 carries on the legacy of Assar Gabrielsen, who once said that cars are driven by people. Therefore, the fundamental principle on which our designs are based must always be safety. For the ball bearing company SKF. Here they had become acquaintances, but had never spoken at length. Then on July 25th, 1924, Assar Gabrielsen was eating crawfish at a cafe in Stockholm when Larsson happened to walk in. Gabrielsen recognized his co-worker and invited him to the table. After the meal, the two men discussed their mutual interest in developing a Swedish motor car industry. Although the two men had very different backgrounds, they shared a similar philosophy. Since the turn of the century, Western car makers built their cars from pre-existing parts. The parent company ordered the parts from vast supply catalogs, maintaining little control over quality. Larsson and Gabrielsen sought to change this. They insisted that the parts should be designed by their company, with the suppliers of these parts being subjected to routine inspection. The direction of the company was established, but money was needed to get it running. Assar Gabrielsen knew that it would be easier to attract investment if he had a prototype. One day, Gabrielsen was looking through a local magazine when he came upon a picture of a French Voisin with a rebuilt body. The work had been done by a well-known Swedish landscape painter, Helmer Musola. Gabrielsen asked the painter to design a body for his prototype. Musola agreed, and by June of 1926, the first car was completed. Both Larsson and Gabrielsen were still working for SKF. They devoted all their spare time to the project, and most of the funding came from Gabrielsen's sales commission. Because there was still no company, there was no badge to put on the car. For lack of a better idea, Helmer Musola simply attached the Swedish symbol for iron, a symbol which is widely associated with masculinity. The first prototype. At the dawn of the 20th century, the sight of a motor car rumbling through the Swedish countryside was certain to draw attention. Although it was first introduced to Sweden in 1891, it would take many years for the motor car to become an integral part of Swedish life, and even longer before it would be driven by the common man. Wealthy Swedish businessmen and landowners were the first to discover the virtues of the private motor car. But with the Swedish car-making industry virtually non-existent, these early drivers were usually seen behind the wheel of a French, German, or American model. Two men were determined to change this. The first was S.R. Gabrielsson, a businessman who dreamed of one day selling a Swedish motor car. The other was Gustav Larsson, an engineer who gained experience building cars for the Morris Company in England. By the early 1920s, both men Over the years, the Volvo name has become synonymous with strength and reliability. Volvo's commitment to standards and obsession for safety have always been far ahead of its time. For this reason, the Volvo car has endured over a half-century of criticism. But through the years, has developed a style all its own. Type was an open version with a rugged, if not conservative, appearance. It was given the name Jacob. Jacob's Day is the Swedish calendar name for July 25th, the day that Gabrielsson and Larsson met in the cafe. 9 more prototypes were built. After proving it could be done, Gabrielsson received the blessing of SKF's board of directors. Instead of starting a new car company, SKF decided to reinstate one of its dormant ball bearing subsidiaries. The ball bearing company AB Volvo was dusted off. And on January the 1st, S.R. Gabrielsson was made managing director. Production of the Volvo motor cars would take place at the site of the old Nordic Ball Bearing Company outside of Gothenburg. In October of 1926, Gabrielsson and Larsson both drove prototypes to their new home at Gothenburg. Upon arrival, they were surprised to find the gatekeeper, Mr.